Welcome to the Modern Software Engineering channel. Today's one big question is, what skills do devs actually need in the age of AI code? I'm Trisha.
Yeah. Who are you?
Yeah, that's where I was going to go.
Oh, I'm sorry. I already interrupted.
Do you want to keep going or should we start?
No. Go right ahead. This is Trisha Gee, fabulous thinker about software development, amazing presenter, and glad to be here with you today.
Thank you. This is Kent Beck, amazing person, someone who I learned about test-driven development from, who I was very privileged to meet in person last year. Lots of opinions on software development, developers, and genies. So I really wanted to ask you this question about what skills do devs need in the age of AI code, because I see that you're actually using agents and AI coding to do code. As someone who's been, how do I put this politely? You've got lots of experience in writing code for a long time.
You can say old, it's fine.
You're not old, you're very experienced. I was really interested in your viewpoint on, because you have adopted AI development, and I think people might have expected you to be somewhat grumpy about these new tools, but in actual fact, I think you've kind of embraced them. So I'm interested in your viewpoint on using AI.
Well, one of the beauties of being old is you can be grumpy and enthusiastic at the same time. It's a form of emotional multitasking, and I've gotten good at it with lots of practice. So people look at augmented development, developing with the genie, and they think, well, this is completely different because my activities are very different. I'm not typing all the time. I'm reading way more. I'm doing more kind of review, more project management kind of stuff, more planning, looking at more feedback. And they think, well, okay, like all of my skills must just be gone. And my experience of it is that that's not at all true. That 90% of what I used to pride myself on, knowing all of the keyboard shortcuts for the refactorings in all of my IDEs, that was really important when I'm doing hundreds of refactorings in a day. Just doesn't matter if I don't do refactorings by hand anymore. But knowing to do a refactoring, that becomes really important. That sense of timing, the sense of taste, the sense of short-term versus long-term, the sense of now it's time to introduce this architectural principle. All those become much more important because you're making those kinds of decisions so much more often than you used to. So for that kind of code I do, those are the skills that really have a lot of leverage.
This kind of brings me to something I've been thinking for a long time. Like, I always felt like we've never been looking for the right skills when we're trying to hire developers anyway. We often used to test them on syntax and APIs and, weird compiler tricks and things like that. When in actual fact, the skills that we've always used are the sorts of things you're talking about, like design taste, knowing when to slow down, knowing when to refactor, for me, it's things like knowing when to ask clarifying questions of the business and knowing when to push back and say, hey, is that what you really want? And I think these are the sorts of skills that really good developers have got that are never really going to go away if you're using a different way of creating code.
Yeah, so the creation of the code, the cost of that is dropped to zero, except that the way the genie naturally creates code creates a lot of friction in the process. So if you just kind of let the genie do its thing, it's going to go slower and slower and slower over time. Now, we spent decades of our lives, I did, maybe it's just years for you, but working with teams of humans, and they also got slower and slower and slower over time. That process just happened so much faster with the genie involved. And so being aware of what's slowing you down, what you should do about it now, what you can do about it in the future, that becomes a much more important skill.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Like, I can't think of a single team I've ever joined where, whether we were near the beginning of a project or it was a legacy project, there was still bits of code which were gnarly and difficult to change, and areas where we had tech debt, whatever that means, where it was slow to add stuff and the business never gave you time to fix it. And that's just always been the way. I was interested in what you were saying when I went to your Tidy Code workshop in Go to Copenhagen, when you were talking about this and how code is just naturally going to get more difficult to change if you don't pay attention to the cleanliness of the code and how easy it is to make changes to.
Yeah, I like to talk in terms of optionality instead of debt. I think there's a deep analogy with debt that people understand if they are like financial traders. But usually people think debt, oh, that's a bad. Why'd you make that mistake in the first place? So I think the positive spin on it is we have options and we can do things that increase our features, or we can do things that increase our options. And both of those create value. The features are really visible, very legible, easy to count, easy to point to. The options are harder because it's kind of like, well, the next time we add a feature like this is going to be much easier than it was the last time. Maybe. And how much of that do you do? And you imagine some big change that you can make that will give us all the options in the world, but does it really? And can we afford to spend that money right now? Those are all still difficult questions to answer. And because the whole timeline is compressed, they become more valuable because we're making those decisions again much more frequently than we used to be. I want to highlight another one, which is something I thought of in an earlier conversation today. Geeks, the way you become a geek is you dig deep into technical topics and you get this confidence like, yeah, if things change, I have the confidence that I can learn the next thing. And just a sense that I have of geeks around, even the people who are embracing the genie are starting to lose confidence that they'll be able to learn the next set of skills. And confidence is a skill, and you can cultivate it and you can practice it. And I think we all need to get better at it. In fact, it's people building tools for people. However, we're one more level of abstraction removed from what we were doing. And so that confidence, like, yeah, things are going to change and things are going to get different. That's okay. We'll be able to figure it out. Just having that confidence is a basic skill that everybody needs to cultivate.
Yeah, I agree with that. I have to say, I think my confidence has been somewhat hit because I spent 10 years of my career talking about IDE shortcuts, right? And now I'm like, are we even using IDEs anymore? Like, what's the point of me? But that's why I wanted to have this conversation, because I think the sorts of skills that we can take confidence from, especially if we've got experience in the industry, are still applicable. Things like thinking through what could go wrong with this code, or what could go wrong with this use case, or which comes to testing, which I want to talk about in a minute. Or like you were saying, optionality, being able to recognize optionality, or being able to recognize that you're closing off options and understand what implications that might have. These are things that I think we've been doing as developers for a long time. I don't recognize it as skills because you don't put it on your CV or resume as I'm able to recognize optionality and when not to do certain things, right? You say, I can use Spring Boot and Java, which is, not the same thing. So I did want to talk about testing because I'm a big fan of testing. You're a big fan of testing. And I think that the skills that we learn writing automated tests, particularly if we TDD, are still really valid in the age of AI, even if we don't necessarily hand write all of our unit tests the way we might have done in the past. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, so I had a project. I have a series of live videos called the Genie Sessions, where I'm just streaming live coding with a genie, and was looking at one of the projects I did in that session, in one of those sessions, and I realized, oh, there's a bunch of uncovered code here. There are a bunch of corner cases that aren't covered. I felt pretty good at the time it was going, but I needed the awareness to go and review the tests that were there. The nice thing about having the genie around is you can always ask the genie. So knowing about something like coverage testing, where I can say to the genie, run a coverage tester and propose to me tests that will only pass if the uncovered code works the way it's supposed to. Now, whoa, that's so vague to say all of that. If you're used to, writing every character of every test yourself, that seems like it's hopelessly vague. But in fact, that does a pretty good job of filling in the holes in a test suite. All those tricks that mutation testing, fuzz testing, sending random inputs in. When you get a crash, you reduce the set of random inputs to the minimum set that still reproduces the crash. If you have those tools in your box, they're more valuable than they used to be, because you can say, run a coverage tester and tell them, propose the tests. Now you can review the result of that. You can say, well, what part of the code does that cover? Why do we miss this in the first place? Does this really matter? Does this make sense? Is it really redundant with the other tests we have, or is this something genuinely new? You can do all that with the Genie's help in minutes in a way that would have taken hours before. And so every trick you have in your box of tricks, every tool you have in your toolbox, there we go, that's better. Every tool that you have in your toolbox, you can pull it out and use it multiple times a day now in a way that maybe you would do the same thing once a year before.
Yeah. And I like what you're saying about one of the things I quite like about working with the Genie or with an LLM or chat system is that it does force you to formulate your thoughts, right? Like you were saying, in the past, we might have looked at a piece of uncovered code and gone, oh, that's a piece of uncovered code, I should write a test. But by forcing yourself to think, what are the activities that need to happen in order to make sure that gets covered? And what am I looking for? And why am I looking for it? That helps you. I think that helps you write potentially a more resilient system, because instead of just going, I'm going to write the dumbest unit test possible to make sure the code has coverage.
Yeah, no assertions.
Yeah, exactly. And you're testing your getters and setters or whatever. You're thinking, what is this code? What is it for? What do I want to prove or disprove? And you might even come to the conclusion the code's not even necessary, for example, the production code or whatever. So I think that for me, what I found really helpful is just writing the prompt more often than not helps me understand what it is I'm trying to do. Whereas in the past, it helped when I was doing pair programming, because when I was navigating, I'd write down the notes of the things that I need to do next, or the steps that we need to take later. But before I did pair programming, I would quite often do what a lot of us do and just sit down and write code. And then at some point you get to a point where you're like, what was I doing? And why am I doing this? And what was the point? One of the reasons I like TDD is because it forced me to do it in smaller steps. But the working with the Genie, working in small steps is still useful. It's one of the things I wrote down, or like breaking stuff into small things is a good thing. But having your eye on the prize of what are we trying to do here, I think like typing that out to the Genie and say, I'm trying to do this thing, helps us keep clear where we're going and what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I've found surprising influence by stating high-level goals, even if they aren't really relevant to the details. Like, we would like people to have confidence in the performance of this data structure. Oh, okay, so that's a high-level goal. That's not like a tool invocation. That's not even a programming technique that I apply to it, but it helps me remember what I'm doing, and it also influences the Genie. So I think that's maybe a new skill in the augmented coding toolbox, which is remembering to state high-level goals of what you're doing. Every once in a while, it'll come up with, okay, so since that's what we're trying to do, let me try and achieve this sub-goal. And you're like, whoa, I wouldn't have thought of that. And that's a fantastic moment. I mean, sometimes it suggests things to do that are just infuriating, and then I'm ever more addicted to this slot machine nature of this stupid tool I'm using. But
but I think that's where sometimes experience comes in, right? Because you can look at the result and just go, this is clearly nonsense. Go away and do it again. But I also like the fact that it could suggest things to you that you might not have thought about. So, for example, you mentioned mutation testing earlier. When I was giving a talk about testing a couple of years ago, I went off and I spent 2 days researching mutation testing, because I kind of vaguely theoretically knew what it was, but I didn't know how it worked, what the pros and cons were, how to do it, what the frameworks were, any of that stuff. But if a Genie kind of said back to you or generated some mutation tests or talked to you about mutation testing, you can ask it, hey, like, what is that? What is it for? What are the pros and cons? Why do I need it? Or maybe I don't need it. So you can have you can educate yourself while you're kind of going along. And I quite like that, because it's one of the reasons I like the IDE, because your education is usually like contextually based on the things that you care about right now. And the Genie is like, now is a good time to learn about mutation testing. Like, oh, good. Tell me what I need to know about mutation testing, and write one for this thing and tell me what's good about it.
So I'll add to the list curiosity. which is my restatement of what I think you just said, which is cultivating that sense of curiosity where you're like, what is mutation testing? Well, you have an infinitely patient tutor,
Yeah.
a little bit, maybe little tipsy, but yet there's a tutor right there. You can ask them all kind of questions. You can ask about the programming language you're using. You can ask about the tools internals. You can ask about the code that you're working on. You can ask about alternatives. You can ask about the techniques that it pulled out. And cultivating that sense of curiosity, learning to listen to your own ideas and give them appropriate weight, that's a highly leveraged skill that we're all just learning. So I did this project in a live coding session, and at the end of it, so it was doing a key value store on GPUs, and I'd never written any GPU code before, so I thought, oh, this would be fun. And I got something was working, and okay, well, that's interesting. But how does this GPU stuff work? And I don't know where the idea came from, just whatever, random photons mashing in my brain. I said, write me a fairy tale that explains the fetch operation. And it came up with this, there's a queen and she lives in a castle and the messenger comes and she goes to the library and tells the pages and blah, 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 blah. There's the whole thing written up as a fairy tale. And I thought, oh, okay. Now, I'm not going to say write your documentation in the form of fairy tales or haikus or raps or Shakespearean sonnets or whatever, but being aware that you could gives you all kinds of options for understanding your world. And we're all in this efficiency mania where we just want to do the next thing. And as soon as you get a thing done, then you have to be starting the next thing right away. And learning to see the space between the features and learning to use our new tools to nourish ourselves in that process, to learn more things, to communicate more clearly with our colleagues, that's a hugely transformative skill. Because I'm endlessly curious, but I also have to get stuff done. So I'm looking at your bookshelf behind you right now, for example, and I'm like, oh, I'd like to read that one. That looks interesting. And with the Genie, I still don't have infinite time to do that. But if I choose to use it, I have time to the word indulge my curiosity. I don't invest in my curiosity.
Or sate it to some extent.
Yeah. I would never sate it.
Okay. Go towards sating it a tiny bit.
Yeah. Another line of skills that I'd love your take on is soft skills. Soft skills do interpersonal skill, like intrapersonal and interpersonal skills. I'll give you the softball setup. Are those more or less important, Trisha?
Yes. My co-author, Helen Scott, wrote a blog post about this. She wrote about how soft skills makes it sound bad, as if they're just not as important as the hard skills. And I think, I can't remember if I've done a video about it, but I've talked before about how I hate the term good communication skills. So I've done a lot of CV and resume screening, and all developers put at the top of it good communication skills. And then they spend like 3 paragraphs explaining all their technical skills. So they've put all of their soft skills in good communication skills. And yet that, even if you're talking about just the communication bit, let alone all the other soft skills, you've got all sorts of different types of communication. You have asynchronous communication via email, like written communication. You've got like spoken communication. You've got team communication. You've got talking up to your boss. You've got talking down to your minions. You've got customer speak. Some people are good at one particular set of communication skills and not everything. And that's fine. So, but we super underrate all of these skills. We just group it as like, I have soft skills. Like, no, you don't. You're a developer. Like, I'm going to be rude.
Whoa. Shots fired. Oh, and we're almost out of time.
So actually, I do want to explore the fact that we do have soft skills as developers, and we chronically underrate them. We chronically don't, like you're saying, invest in them. We don't put them on our resumes. We don't look for them in interviews. And these soft skills are things I mentioned before, like asking the business, did you really want a big red button which prints this thing? Or what was it you were really trying to do? The sort of business analysis skills that most developers need. Things like the ability to say no. That's a skill that as you get more senior, you really need to be able to prioritize, like direct your time, say no, and, and communicate with stakeholders, set expectations, all these sorts of things. Even if you're still an IC writing code, you still need to be able to do all those things. And now that we're talking to the genie, these skills are even more important. Like, I'm trying to do a thing. This is important. This is less important. Please prioritize these things. You know that the answer is always it depends for a bunch of stuff. So being able to list out, it depends on these things, and these are my answers to these kinds of like knobs and twiddles. And these are things that we're as developers are always doing in our heads, but we don't put it down on paper that this is the skill that we use. And we don't say, we don't have names for half of these skills, but we are talking about communication skills, soft skills, people skills. The main thing I think the developer does, especially these days when developers don't just write code, pre-AI, they don't just write code, they do talk to business stakeholders, they do DevOps, they do potentially talk to customers. These people, developers, are a bridge between the silicon and the end user or the customer who asked for it. This is a really difficult thing to do. No matter how you get the operations onto the silicon and where the silicon is hosted, it's very difficult to take that customer requirement of, I want a big red button that does a report, and come up with something which really meets their needs. And that requires a particular set of skills. And it doesn't matter if you handwrite it in an IDE with Java or translate it into correct prompts in the Genie. The skill is being able to take that fluffy thing and turn it into something that a user can really use. And that's what developers do. That's what developers have always done. And that's why things like human readable business language has never really taken off, and why things like the Genie is not going to replace developers.
Yeah, agreed. Now, the age of augmented development means that we need to exercise those skills more frequently. So there's more leverage in knowing how to say, we can do anything, but we can't do everything. Having a sense of slicing. Okay, so you want all of these things in this bag. Which one would you like first, sir, for ma'am?
Yeah.
And we're exercising those skills once a day instead of once a week, once a month, the way that we had been before, because we can get to a point where we're ready for feedback. We've made decisions. We have something concrete. We're ready for feedback now. If that happens once a day instead of once a month, then anything around getting that feedback, listening to it, absorbing it, communicating it, all of those things become more highly leveraged than before. I want to be aware of time. There's the clock behind you, so I figure you can't see it, but I can. Can you close us out?
So we were talking about what skills do devs actually need in the age of AI code. You mentioned confidence, which is actually something which is eroding somewhat as we worry about our skills. You mentioned curiosity, which I really love. And I wanted to follow up on something there, which was one of the things, as someone who tries to educate developers, one of the things we know is that developers learn in different ways, and depending on who you are. And I love the idea of asking the Genie to translate its teaching style into something that works for you. But that means that you have to understand yourself a little bit better, and you have to learn a bit more about yourself, which I think we have not always been good at recognizing, that we're not autonomous. We are humans, and we have special individual needs which need to be catered for. So you mentioned curiosity. I mean, all the skills we developed with testing in terms of like knowing what good tests look like, why unhappy paths matter, like how we might want to make sure that certain bits of the code are tested, and why we might want to do that kind of thing. And stuff we were talking about in the end, which I can't remember what that was already, because like my brain went blank.
Soft skills.
Soft skills, of course. Communication, and being able to break problems down into smaller pieces, and being able to push back and say no, and prioritize, and decide on the different values of certain things, and embracing this fast feedback loop as well.
Oh,
cool.
Good. Well, what are we going to do next week?
What are we going to do next week? Well, you and I will be in Utah next week talking about the future of software development.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to that. Trisha, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much for being here and sharing your thoughts with us.